It's literally the idea that we're just not going to have enough time to do all the things that we want to do. So in today's talk, with the short amount of time that we have, I want to examine our motives behind wanting it all, because I know so many developers are like me. They want it all. They want to know it all. They want to do it all. And like, there's way too much. I don't know if you've noticed in the JavaScript world, there's way too much to learn. So I want to examine our motives behind wanting it all and the cost that can come to being great. So why do we do what we do? That was one of the questions that I asked myself in the beginning. It's like, kind of comes from the psych degree, but I'm like, why do we do these things, right? Like, why is this something we care about? But why are we here today, listening to people talk, right? Why do we, stay up late learning things? Why are we online, like debugging? Why are we always wanting to learn, wanting to do new things? Is it because we're tryhards? I'm a gamer, so I use a lot of gaming terms. My friends are like, "You're so sweaty. You're such a salty tryhard." I'm like, "Thanks. That means I kicked your butt." So, but no, I think it's because innovating is not just about the technologies that we use on the day-to-day, but I think it's about the psychology behind our motives as well. So the first time I gave this talk, I asked, what do you struggle with? And this was coming from a perspective of not only developers in the room, but designers as well. And I was really actually surprised by the thing that came up over and over again. Because the first time I gave this talk, I was like, here are some things as I'm getting into development, as I'm entering this new world, that I'm struggling with. And I said, what are you struggling with? What did I miss in my talk? And something that I heard multiple times, which was really weird, I was like, oh, this must be important. I obviously missed a big one, was fear. And I was really surprised by this, because at the time, I had never experienced fear in development. It just wasn't something, I was like, what do you mean fear? Like, tell me more about this. But it wasn't just one person that came up to me and said, hey, I think you need to talk about this. This is an issue that I have and that I feel other people have. So, yes, I begin to learn that fear is holding many people back as developers and designers. And whether it's the fear of getting stuck or looking dumb in front of your coworkers or your friends because you don't know that new thing, apparently fear is a big deal. So I have a story that I want to share. And at the time that I first gave this talk, I hadn't experienced fear. But as I grew in my career and I started experiencing more and more things, I was like, oh, wow, okay, so this is what they're talking about. So this is an example, and it might help you relate, because you might be sitting in the audience going, fear? What? No. So if you're one of those, an example was, as I started speaking more and more, I got invited to be a part of the GDE program. And in the GDE program, we have developers from all over the world, not just the US. And so they had a summit of sorts, and they brought all of us together. And the first one that I went to, it wasn't my time zone, and I love when I go and visit other people's time zones, because I am a normal, like average, what I consider normal, average nerd. So that means I like to game, and I like to sleep in, and I like to work nights. And so whenever I visit other time zones, I always am able to get up early and feel like an early bird. And so it's like this success feeling. Like I get up at 6 a.m., your time, and I'm like, look at me, even though it's like 10 p.m. my time, right? So I just feel better about myself. And so I got up super early, and breakfast was open. And so I went down to, check out the other early birds. But of course, it was just a bunch of people who were also not in their time zones. So I guess we're all nerds. So I went, and I walk up to the table, and all of the, there's like a spread of food in front of you, and then behind you is where the seating is. So as I'm, buttering my bagel, I hear like the morning conversations coming from behind me. And I thought it was really bizarre, because from this half of the room in this ear, I heard English. And I was like, that's weird, because every conversation on this half of the room was in every other language. I was like hearing French, I think there was Spanish and Russian. I was like, what is going on? And so like, as I'm buttering my bagel, right, I'm like, where are you gonna go? Like, as I turn around, all I know is English and Angular, but apparently that doesn't count as a language. But so I'm like, where am I going to sit? I'm like, well, I could go over here. It's super early. It'd be uncomfortable to sit with people who I don't know their language. I was like, so it's super cheesy, and you can grit your teeth with me if you want, but I literally said this to myself. I said, Alyssa, be the change you want to see in our community. Yeah, super nerdy. Super nerdy. So I went over and I sat at the table where no one was speaking English at the time. They were kind enough to talk with me, and I got to hear their stories and where they were from. But it was literally the smallest picture of fear, right? Because it's not like anything. I mean, the worst that could happen to me is what? I could be embarrassed. They could not be friendly. Ouch, right? That's not really life-changing. But it's still something that could have had an effect on the outcome of my trip there. And so I think it's something that we should constantly be aware of, that even if you're not struggling right now, someone might be, someone who you're working with right now. So yes, this was a few years back now, but I was so excited the first time I got my first JIRA ticket. I was so excited. And honestly, I know you guys might think it's super nerdy, but to this day, anytime I get a ticket assigned to me, and I get to complete it, I get this little moment of this thrill, I did something. I don't know, I definitely am in the right job, I think. But a larger example of fear is when I got my first dev job, because straight out of college, I actually started at code school, and I was teaching. And so, yes, I was developing in order to teach, but developing and learning to develop in order to teach is a lot different than in your day job with a sprint and your boss going, where's that feature? It's a lot different. And so I finally was like, you know what? I'm going to pull the plug. I'm going to stop being a teacher for a bit and be a full-time dev. And so the first day, I woke up and I had this sick, horrible, I don't know if you've ever had this feeling right here, and it's just all consuming, and it's kind of a nausea feeling. And I was like, what is this? Why do I feel like this? And I'm the psychologist in me examining my feelings. I'm kind of weirdo. But I'm like, why am I feeling like this? And I'm like, oh, it's because I'm super nervous that they're all going to think I'm a big idiot, right? And I was like, this is what those people were talking about whenever they came up to me and they said, you need to talk about fear. And so this is a bigger example of fear. So that was a small example that really didn't have a lot of consequence. A bigger example that I think actually can stop people from entering our industry. But the moral of the story is that we cannot be great alone. So if you're out there right now and you're having this same feeling of fear, or if you're out there right now and you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm super awesome and I know everything. That's great, but you need to be aware that there are people around you, next to you, at your day job, your friends, your nerds on Twitter that you follow. There are people who really struggle with this. And that should matter to us. Because we as a community, we as developers, cannot be great alone. So, yes, as I mentioned, there are two types of people in the world. I like to call one type brave adventurers. I love scuba diving. I dive at night in dark caves where there are these things called bloodworms that if you turn on your flashlight, they'll swarm you and they get in your wetsuit. I do stuff like that. I skydive, right? I'm a brave adventurer. But I still struggled with fear in my everyday life, even in these small examples. So, yes, there are two types, brave adventurers and then normal everyday folks who are I need some help. So just remember that, so that I think a really good example is when someone comes and asks you for help or asks you a question. And I think keeping in mind that some people, it's really hard for them to break out of their comfort zone and come to help and be like, hey, I don't actually know what this means, right? For some people, that's a humongous step. And so keep in mind that it's not easy for everyone. And so that, because a too harsh word or quick answer or oh my God, you don't know that, really? That could literally send that person back into hiding. And that's not a good place for learning, for growing. So I have another talk that I give, and it's called The Day I Met Steve. And these are all hand-drawn slides. So if you need a designer, Jake, none of you are smiling right now. That was 100% a joke. That's the worst stick figure ever, but you can laugh. So anyways, yes, I have another talk that's called The Day I Met Steve. And that dives deeper into the next pitfall. And the pitfall is so important that I've literally dedicated a whole talk to it. So I think it's worth mentioning today. So yes, the day I met Steve. This was at the same job. I was a developer, and I went out to help the company I was with. And we worked a lot with people in, it was a printing industry. And so, talk about color math fun. I literally had to, hey, like the user is gonna see this on a fabric, and hey, they're gonna see it on a display, and those colors are different, do better, right? Things like that. And so we're working with like really expensive machinery and things like if the printing head is like moving back and forth while the machine is open and something hits it, that costs the company like tens of thousands of dollars if it breaks the head. So make sure your software doesn't do that. And you're like, okay, right. So there was some really cool problems that I got to solve while I was there. And they had their own in-house developers, and so I was there on the floor working with some of them to make a better product for them. And I will never, ever forget this conversation. So Steve, in the red shirt, is one of the developers. And before this day, I didn't know this type of person existed. So Steve's sitting there in his office, and I'm talking to him about an API he built. And we'll call her Carol. Carol walks in. And she says, she works there. She works on the print room floor. And she walks in and says, Steve, I really would like to use special characters, please. And he's like, Carol, we've had this conversation before. I told you, you just can't use special characters. And she's like, yeah, I know, but you know that submit form that I have to fill out every single day of my life? It would be super awesome if I could use special characters. Quotes, for instance, for inches, instead of having to type out inches. And he's like, nope, you can't do it. You have to write it out. Oh, and I'll never forget what he said, because she was trying to argue, and she was like, it would make my life so much easier, right? And that right there, that triggered me, because I'm over in the corner and I'm like, Steve, it would make her life so much easier, right? Isn't that what we are as developers? That right there, to make people's lives easier, to solve problems. So when she said it would make our lives so much easier if we could just use special characters, and I will never forget, he said, I don't make the rules, I just write the code. And I'm over here in the background like, what on earth is he talking about? Because Carol might not know, but I, as a developer, know, because I was looking at his code, that he very much does write the rules because he writes the code, right? So it was this weird, baffling moment where I was just like, what just happened? Has anybody out there ever met a Steve before? No? Yeah? A couple? Awesome. Awesome. If you didn't raise your hand, question, am I a Steve, right? Just putting that out there. Just putting it out there. I'm kidding. I'm joking. But seriously, I had no idea. And I started, of course, examining the why behind it. And after talking more with Steve, I really believe, I know there are different cases, and I know that some people were born as Steves. And I apologize if your name is Steve. But I really do believe that Steve was suffering from burnout. And I don't know if any of you have ever experienced it before. There's an article by Dr. Jerry, and I'll put in a link below, and I'll tweet out the slides as well, so no worries if you're like, what did she say? But there's an article by Dr. Jerry, and she describes a burnout patient, because literally, she was a psychologist, and she treated burnout patients. That's what she did. People who had really bad jobs and were really burned out. And she said they're like a vacant shell of a burned out building. It's ugly, it's nasty, it affects every part of your day, right? Burned out workers feel like a cog in a machine. You're not a human anymore and nobody cares. Whew. So yeah, Dr. Jerry, that's her name. So as I was studying this, I'd obviously heard of burnout before. I think everyone's heard of it. But what I was really shocked to learn was that it wasn't just a mental state that you can be in. Like, obviously, if I'm burned out, like, the code I'm producing probably isn't that quality. Or the tests I'm writing aren't that awesome. Or, the other people who I'm checking their code, probably not doing that too thoroughly. Like, there's a lot of mental things and work things that can be affected. But something that I was, like, blown away by was that there's actual physical symptoms that follow with burnout. I was like, no way. So as I continue reading, I continue studying and learning more. It's not just fatigue, but sheer exhaustion, irritability, inability to concentrate, chronic and acute disease. Now, this is where I did a double take when I'm like, what? What do they mean by that? Because I literally, okay, these all make sense, right? You're tired, you're cranky, you can't concentrate. Sounds like me on a bad morning, right? Like, sure. But a chronic acute disease, I was like, are they serious? What does that even mean? And so I was really, really shocked because Dr. Jerry said that she's treating these people for burnout. She's helping them get out of bad situations, right? So these people have gotten out of their horrible situation, whether it was for months or years, whatever, they are now in a better place, okay? So 10% of these people who are now in a better place, they're not burned out anymore. They've gotten to a better spot. They're working on things in their life. After leaving the organization and getting out of the toxic environment, developed cancer. And I know it's not a causation. I understand that. I studied correlation and statistics. I get it. But it's way too high of a percentage for me to feel comfortable with. I mean, 10%, good God. How many people do I know on the daily who are like literally on Slack until 3 a.m. or later, and I'm like, they're still working, right? Like, oh my gosh, go home. So, or they're at home and they're working, right? So I think one of the things that really was a huge red flag for me when I met Steve, but that I've also seen in others, is that they're actively harming those they set out to help. I don't know if you've ever noticed this before, but it's like those bugs that have been in like the code for so long that the user expects it to work that way, and so now it's a feature. Like it's like that, where it's just gotten so warped that over time you're no longer helping those people. You're actually getting in their way. So it's just, at this point you might be like, what on earth can we do, right? This is some horrible news you're laying down for us. So this is me. I'm actually going on a dive trip in 2 weeks. This one was a pretty old picture. But I love diving, as I mentioned. And yes, I know you're not supposed to take off your fins, but I like to walk on the bottom like I'm some kind of like mer person with feet. I don't know. And so I was just hanging out, and my husband was like recording and taking pictures, and these two sharks started circling, and I was like, sweet. Right? Not most people's reaction, but I know what kind of sharks are dangerous and when I need to get out of the water, and this wasn't one of those moments. So he's just circling, and so my husband holds out his hand, and I'm like, oh, okay. So I hold out my hand, and as he circles and gets closer and closer, he like brushes up against us. I was like, I just pet a shark. Like, I was so excited. It was a blast. But this is just one thing that I can offer, and it's super simple. And it doesn't have to be as expensive as scuba diving. It could be basket weaving. But to find an interest, any interest outside of development, because I've had too many friends who I've watched just let work deteriorate their life because they let it be their number one. So you have to have something, anything, that is a passion that you can pour yourself into. Something that I want to ask you is, do you remember how you got here? Like, not here today. I walked from the hotel. No. Do you remember how you got here in this industry? Another way to put it, what passion once, or hopefully still does, burn in you? So for me personally, that is a magnifying glass, because I like to call myself a code detective. I'm not kidding. Anytime a bug comes my way, I'm like, what's causing it? Let's solve it. Like, I get so excited. And then once we finally do solve it, I'm like, yes! I mean, and sometimes it can be a bit painful along the way, but that is why I'm here. That is why I'm a developer, because of the puzzle and the riddle and why things tick. It keeps me interested, it keeps me passionate, it keeps me going. So other than having passions outside of this industry, I would love for you to ask yourself and take a minute to think, like, why am I here? Why do I care? And I hope that you have an answer, because I know that some people are like, I don't know, I just fell into it, or I guess because I'm good at it maybe. Like, I'm just like, oh, okay, you don't have any passions? Okay, it's fine. No. But I think if you can keep in mind your most meaningful reason to be a developer, when Carol walks into your office and your plate is really full and you're working with a junior annoying developer and trying to teach her things, it might be helpful if you remember your reason for being here, so that you can be like, maybe I can make special characters work, right? Maybe I can go the extra mile, because there's a big difference between helping people and actively harming them in the day-to-day. So keeping that in mind, I think, can really be useful, and finding a way to connect to what we do on the day-to-day and get out of the code and remember the humanity in it can really help us along the way, I think. Yes. So innovating is not just about technology, the technologies that we use on the day-to-day, but the psychology behind why we do what we do. And I think I used to say that there are two types of people who are super ecstatic about making their mark in this world, people who are just like go-getters, and then just like the other people, right? But I've actually met a fun in-between. So for the sake of Booleans, we're gonna pretend like there are, two people, those who are ecstatic and those who are not. And if you're out there and you're in the audience, and like I said before, you're like, you know what? I've never experienced burnout. I've never experienced fear. She's cuckoo, right? Like, just try to keep in mind that some people in the audience are going through this. And I like to call winners wieners. It's like just this weird, it's not really wordplay. I'm like literally cutting out a letter in the word. But I'll be like, when I'm gaming online at night, I'll be like, you guys are such wieners. And they know I'm calling them winners, but like in a weird way. I know, it's weird. You can laugh. But I like to say surrounded by winners, because I think this has been something that's really, really helped me in my life. It's vital to surround yourself with people who do care and who can speak truth into you during hard moments. We are at the 5-minute mark. I'm gonna try to move a bit faster. I've been told more times than I care to count how passionate I am. And now I know that sounds like a good thing, but have you ever been told something so many times that you're like, yes, I'm so passionate? Like, it just is annoying at a certain point when people go to, we had this horrible, please don't ever do this with your company, thing called a compliment line. Has anybody ever heard of a compliment line? Please, no one raised their hand. Thank you, Lord Jesus. I pray to God none of you ever experience a compliment line. It was this thing at my company where we'd all line up and you'd have one row here and the other row facing each other, and you kind of like moved in a circle, and you had a timer. Oh my gosh, it was so horrible. I'm like having a little bit PTSD right now, going flashbacks. But you had a timer, and I think it was like 1.5 minutes, and you had to spend 1.5 minutes with every person that you worked with, giving them compliments. And I was like, I don't know what Sally from marketing does. And I would literally be in the bathroom beforehand, like, what am I gonna say to Sally? I don't even know what she's been working on, like sweating because I'm so stressed out about it. And there's some dudes at the company who would be like, you're passionate. And then be like silent for the rest of the 1.5 minutes. And I'd be like, like, I just like literally worked on this essay for you. And they're like, you're passionate. I'm like, okay. So anyways, I've been told more times than I can count how passionate I am. And I am, and it's a great place to be. But I can't tell you how many of my friends just aren't there. So I like to call it the SWW Club. They're in the Sitting, Waiting, and Wishing Club. Which literally, as it sounds, many of my friends are just kind of like chilling. And like they're like, oh yeah, an update came out to that framework. Cool, we're still on version 4, right? Like they just have no desire whatsoever to learn new things. And so if you or someone you know is in the SWW Club, I have 3 easy steps to help you dig yourself out. So the first one is to ask why more. To stop just soaking it up and literally be like, why does our code work this way, right? Like, or why does the API that we, like our backend team built, like work that way? Can we make it more efficient? And so I think just asking why more can lead to a healthier lifestyle. The second one is to teach. Not just to teach yourself, right? Because we're constantly reading blog posts or taking courses, watching YouTube videos, going to things like this, but teaching others. I cannot tell you the number of times that someone's asked me something that I know, and then I'll start teaching it to them, and I'm like, wait, why does that work that way? Or, oh crap, what is that? Like, and so by teaching others, it really reinforces, yes, I do know this, or it shows you, no, I need to learn it better, right? So teaching is number 2. And number 3 is, to help you out of the sitting, waiting, and wishing, is to want more. I'm surrounded by amazing people in my life. I've created this bubble. These people are constantly striving and achieving, but they're also helping me, and they're calling me out when I'm doing something that I shouldn't be doing, or when I'm slipping into potential burnout zone, right? They'll call me out and speak truth into me. But at the end of the day, at the end of my life, at the end of this career, Alyssa is the only one that is responsible for where Alyssa is at. And so I want you all to know right now that you're worth wanting more. Whether it's in your relationships, whether it's in your day jobs, whether it's in your gaming online at night, like I want you to want more for yourself because you are absolutely worth it. So that's number 3 to help you with the sitting, waiting, and wishing. Innovation is not just about technology, but psychology. Understanding our motives behind why we do what we do is sadly just one small part, and we don't have time for many parts today. I'm actually out of time right now as we speak. So I'm going to jump ahead to my last point. And I have given this talk in longer format, if you ever want to rewind or watch it again, but on the YouTubes. But my last point is to try and be thoughtful and intentional. A lot of the things that we've talked about today can be alerted or to be aware if you are thoughtful and intentional with the words that you say and the code that you write. And I think if we can all do that, we can really be great together. Somebody actually told me this, and I love this quote. It's an amazing analogy for this talk, but essentially a good surfer knows when to get on a wave, but they also know when to get off that wave. And I think that's super, super valuable for our lives and for our development careers. Because sometimes we all just need to get off the wave for a bit so that we don't get burned out, or so that we can realize, hey, there are people around me struggling with fear. Maybe I could do better, do something about that. So yes, my name is Alyssa Nicoll. Thank you all so much. And have a marvelous evening. Thanks.